Today's show is brought to you by Folk Consulting Services. Folk Consulting Services has more than 15 years of experience and is a high-caliber, industry-leading services provider of application performance testing services, monitoring, and management with a strong background in software quality assurance. Folk Consulting has the greatest consultants in the world, and they love growing their customer-focused relationships. Find out more at www.folkconsulting, that's F-O-U-L-K, consulting.com.
How does garbage collection impact my KPI? Why can't I have dessert for breakfast? Should I use percentiles or averages? Why do clocks help you? What's up with the number 42? What is the N+1 problem? Can exceptions ever be useful? Why don't developers like me? Why does grandma smell funny?
Ask Perf Bites.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Ask Perf Bites. I'm your host, Brian Wilson, and I had a dream there were clowns in my coffee. This episode's question comes from Jay. Jay asks Perf Bites, when should I incorporate browser-based tests in my load test? Well, thanks for the question, Jay. To help us answer this question, I've asked Señor Performo, otherwise known as Leandro Melendez, to help. Buenos noches, Leandro. ¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien, amigo. I'm very well, doing fine, enjoying these lockdown times, and very happy to be here and again contribute and help to all our friends that need some performance knowledge to be shared.
Great, and thank you for coming back on.
My pleasure, anytime.
Oh, great. I'll take you up on that all the time. So this question, right, back when I was still actively performance testing in like 2010, 2011, I was looking to add browser testing to load testing. It was all inspired by the WebPerf initiative that, I don't know if we give him full credit, but Steve Souders was really saw him as the head of that whole bit with the WebPerf initiative. And you started thinking about expanding performance testing to browser testing because, this is around the time when at least me and my colleagues realized that performance testing doesn't just mean load testing, but performance can be for single transaction. So my team lead at the time, Robert and I, we wanted to include the front-end performance. So we figured it would be great to test that WebPerf under load, right? So that we can see the impact of browser performance while the system is under load, not just how it performs in, under sunny day scenarios. But unfortunately, back then, the company I was working for wasn't interested. And so that's all really a long way to say that very interested in the question. And this is an area of testing that I wanted to expand into and didn't get to, but this would have been a topic that I would have had to tackle if we actually got to execute that back then. So let's dive into this. You really jumped at the chance to talk about this one, so I'm assuming you have plenty of experience with this. If not, you can go ahead and fake it. I think there are a lot of ways we could look at this question, right? So how do you want to start tackling this?
So as you mentioned, this topic has been around for a while in the world of performance and load testing. And I believe I will open with probably there are many confusions around the topic, and I usually like to segment topics and provide information regarding where to start, when to use them, when to not, and what are the benefits on some of those options. And as you very well said, this all started departing a little bit, automating at the different from the protocol level and starting to simulate a full browser so that you can get some of that browser behavior more easily integrated into your tests, or your full test to be just browser generated. But as well, and in terms, there are two reasons why you would like to do this. One, it's easier. You most of the time get rid of those ugly correlations that everyone is so afraid of.
Yeah.
And on other times, you go through this route when you just plain and simple cannot go through it with just regular protocols, correlations. There might be some encryption going on or very weird things or communication patterns in between the browser and the servers. Yeah. Which is not that common anymore. I think my humble and very well-known, respectable opinion is that it's a little bit of laziness to deal with the correlations. It's faster, it's easier.
Yeah.
um, and even as a manager or whoever is responsible for requesting this, the amount of skill that you will require for people, scripters, to work on web uh, scripts, web browser scripts, is not as much as for an experienced protocol scripter that needs to know correlations, communication patterns,
Right.
SOAP wrappers.
And what's interesting there? What's interesting there is back when I was looking at this, it was funny too because this was when HP was introducing what was their browser for loader? True Client, yeah, and I believe our friend Mark Tomlinson worked on that. But one of the reasons I was looking into possibly using something like True Client was specifically for script maintenance, right? Because every time you have to go ahead and do a new load test, the first thing is, okay, now we have to run all the tests to see which ones still work, right? And then if they don't still work, which oftentimes something small would break in it, you'd have to go through, possibly re-record. It was to me, I always found it easier to re-record than try to figure out which was specifically wasn't working. But then you have to go through and recorrelate everything. If you were dealing with a .NET page, you had that really annoying. What's that big chunk of encrypted
view state and session state? Yeah, all those.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff to deal with. And I was like, wow, you know what? If I could run all my tests via browser, the scripts might be easier to maintain. And yeah, you might have like a selector change or something on you, but it might just be easier to, even if I have to re-record it, I don't have to go back through then and do all the correlation necessarily. So I just wanted to bring that up because that was one of the appealing reasons for me for wanting to go down that route when we were looking at it back then.
Yeah, certainly when you are working, I'll tell you a little backstory here. The protocol browser, the protocol automations and scripts, they are so unstable and fragile. For years, I used to call them the diva scripts or the diva automations because they are so hard to maintain and to keep up with them. And certainly the web browser-based ones are considerably more stable and easier-ish to detect because, again, to an experienced scripter at the protocol level, you can pretty quick and easy find where it broke. And sometimes they just like completely everywhere. It's a mess and every line of the automation. And with the browser ones, as you say, probably the button name changed here and there, and it's easier, or maybe it just moved a little bit. Some of them are based on coordinates, so they are a bit easier. But and we're still in the realm of load tests, using them for load tests. I'm going to get into some others in a bit, but the downside of them is that they have to simulate foolish browser. They have to spawn one and have it in memory.
Right.
And the drawback here is that the amount of horsepower that you will need to lift each of those is several times, thousands of times larger than a protocol.
Yeah.
So it limits you if you need to do, let's say, 100,000 virtual user tests at a browser level. Well, good luck with that. You will need an incredible amount of machines. VMs are cheaper now, but I can just get from the cloud something cheaper and just spin up some. Yeah, but still, you're going to get a lot processing power, burn through a lot of money. So, and as well, when you get to considerably high numbers of virtual users simulated, they become all the controller, in talking about load runner or the central instances that manage this type of virtual users, start to get wonky, start to lose communication channels. There's so much and it's so heavy that it starts to be a little bit complicated for the central orchestrators of the tests. So there are multiple drawbacks on this. Again, I think, and especially lately when most of your applications are microservice, REST service, any APIs, service, most of them are not that complicated anymore to automate at the protocol level. And I haven't found in a while an application that truly deserves, that says like, hey, I don't have any other way but simulating a browser, and that's the only way that we can do
Mm-hmm.
it. Very few applications pose that problem anymore. Everything is so microservicized, to call it in a way, that thankfully that eases things for us on the protocol level, makes them cheaper to be simulated, and
Right.
it's I often raise an eyebrow anytime someone suggests to do a load test only through web browser simulation.
Yeah, and I think that's. I'm not in that field much anymore, but I don't hear people. I personally don't hear people talking about those. We talk to performance teams in the monitoring side of the space, and I haven't seen that come up too much. But one thing I wanted to go back to for a moment, because I think it's important for people to understand, and I wanted to get what your experience is. My experience with looking at the amount of horsepower that a browser test needs to run, the rule of thumb I was going to run by is no more than 2 virtual users per OS, right? And the reason why I was going with that is I would notice I just pull up Task Monitor, or Task Manager on an operating system, and load a web page and see how many resources it uses. And what you'll notice most of the times when you do that is the browser is going to use as much CPU as it can get. So when I'm loading up a heavy page, I'd see my CPU go up to 75, 80, 90%, right? Because it's going to take as much power as it can. So what you have to consider in that is the more browsers you run on that operating system, the slower they're all going to run, which might skew your results. So yes, if you wanted to be pure, you would run maybe one browser, right? If you wanted to try to cheat, how many, if you were to do that, how many would you run per operating system or per VM, however you want to look at it?
Well, and you said you mentioned something that is key to this answer. I personally, as you say, best case scenario, I would simulate one per box, one browser per box. Especially since nowadays some of these web applications, these web frontends, tend to have several megabytes of JavaScript, things running in the front end. So just one single page, just tell me open 10 different pages in your Chrome browser and see how it starts to suck your CPU and everything starts to get a little bit stupid. You will run into that even with a single application. And this is another key where web performance becomes key on having a good web application. If it's not well designed, if it has large images, thick JavaScripts, lots of code, internal things running here and there, crazy. As an example, I always get into these new Angular dashboards, which have multiple things, calling things frequently everywhere in different directions, and it's refreshing internally constantly 10 things at the same time. That is going to be extremely heavy in your low test environment, and probably and before to close, before I get into the web performance part, because that is also important in the web browser web performance, it's, to my taste, very inefficient to try to generate load tests, especially since the applications lately tend to be heavy. And as you well mentioned, some weird JavaScript running and spinning up the CPU just as a web browser. If I was a real user, not a load test simulation, whatever, I would see weird response times, weird results, but just because the front-end web page was having a tough time, not because the load test was slowing down the server. So that's why I'm very much biased against doing full web browser executions, unless some of those load generator machines that you have are cloud auto-scaling, infinitesimally growing machines. Even then, I would be a little bit uneasy because web front ends tend always to be peculiar, to call it mildly.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to a theme that runs across a lot of these Ask Perf Bytes shows is what would be the purpose or the goal to run it all through the browser? Like, just going back to Jay's question, Jay is asking when you should incorporate browser-based tests in my load test. So I'm assuming, based on that question, that Jay is not asking when should I run a full browser test, but it's like when should I augment my load test, maybe my HTTP protocol or whatever, with browser-side testing. But in terms of the idea of doing 100% browser, I would say give me a reason why you would ever, not to you, but to someone proposing is like, give me a reason why you would want to do that. For script maintenance reasons, that's not a really great idea. Maybe it might be faster, but look at how much money you're going to spend. You're not necessarily going to be able to hit it's going to be much harder to hit your load targets and model your load. Unless there is a very, very specific reason.
Yeah. And as I said,
that you wanted all of your virtual users to be browser based, I would say don't do that.
Yeah. And as very, very well was said, it is a waste of resources. I think it's a bit of laziness. I think unless, and this is the only absolute way why I would allow or think of accepting through generating all the load through a web browser, is because none of the protocol tools can simulate it. I think that's the only reason that, and again, very few ones. Probably you're simulating some, like now how we are recording over a voice over web page protocol.
Right.
Simulating some of those loads just through protocol can be a little bit complicated. Or as an example, these Netflix online video providers that you have to simulate a bunch of browsers that are consuming this video feed and streams, probably in those. And that's been the general approach when networks have to simulate. I remember the Flood guys that were simulating cricket tournament, I believe it was. The only way was simulating full-bridge browsers.
Yeah.
And that's acceptable there. But mostly not because you want to measure the response, but because you want to stress the servers, the central systems, and see how they behave. Not the front end that much, but the central servers.
Yeah. All right. So that then brings us to, is this a good time then to segue into WebPerf and how that might be, I think first there's the concept of what WebPerf is, and then how does that relate and get incorporated in with a load test, right?
Yeah. And for this, and it's very good because after this, we will be able to go back to when would be cool or important to incorporate these browser simulations into a load test. Incorporate, not fully do it. But first, I would like to attack the side of the web performance. As I have been mentioning earlier, heavy JavaScripts, lack of CDNs, bad distributions, heavy images, CSS at the end of the HTML file. There are
fonts.
Crazy fonts at the very end, or even those that exactly where you are.
I've seen pages with 10 fonts on them, and like I've analyzed waterfalls, and it's like 700 milliseconds of the page load was downloading fonts. Yeah.
For some reason, there are some of them that 700 milliseconds was fast. I have seen some that take 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. For some reason, the fonts are stored in the same server that hosts the application, and it's working on some other stuff. And,
yeah.
I mean,
anyway,
there are like cardinal sins that happen on web development, just front end. We're not talking about load. It's separate items.
It's performance, but it's not load. This can happen, right? The kind of performance things we're going to be talking about first can happen under load, under no load. This is all about the performance of the browser, correct?
Yeah, and this goes again in line on my usual rant where performance testing is not the same as load testing. Load testing is a sub-family of performance testing.
Right.
And web performance is part of performance testing. And to explain this a little bit better, I usually go through think of an IKEA factory. Nowadays, we cannot go to the IKEA stores and go around those mazes that we used to go through. We have to order this directly, probably from Amazon, or they have an online seller, and you receive your box with all the stuff ready to be assembled at home. So in this example, on load tests, what we are interested is to see how the factory, the IKEA factory and delivery and shipping and warehouse, all of their side of their solution works under a crazy amount of orders. Web performance worries more about when the package arrives at us, how easy it is to us to put together that furniture.
This is a great analogy, by the way.
Yeah,
I love this. Go on, yeah.
And it depends. I gave IKEA as an example because there are two teams that say it's extremely complicated. People even hire some others to put together their IKEA stuff. Part of the other, the Jacob team, and what was the other team? Twilight movies. Well, I'm part of the other team.
Twilight the movie?
Yeah, there was a Jacob team, and what was the name of the?
I didn't see the Twilight movies.
I happened to see some of them. Well, back to topic.
Yes, it's all right.
So I'm part of the team that considers IKEA furniture to be very fun and easy, and usually can put them together. But not subjectively, objectively speaking, there are some other companies that put them very complicated. Bolts are missing, nails, pieces are. You pretty much need a rocket scientist diploma to be able to put some of those things together.
Yeah.
So those are the web pages that are horrible and very poorly designed. And when your client machine, when your computer receives all that, it can be very complicated to put together, to manage, to use them. And even I have seen some web applications. And as technology moves forward, it gets to be even heavier, thicker, more complicated, and make the computers work way, way more. I dare you to open any web page on existence today with a machine that is 5 or 10 years old. They will have a very hard time. And some applications, even with the machines, some of the one that I have access to that are pretty powerful, have a hard time rendering some of those pages and keeping them open, alive, and are sucking all my resources just by having that page open. So this is part of where web performance deals with. Why would you pay attention to a browser rendering your page, where you want to know how easy for your customer, again with the IKEA example, is it for your customer to put together the furniture and afterwards use it? Probably the chair has 3 arms and you have to sit on the middle one, and I didn't want it to sit on an arm of a chair. So if they are poorly designed, hard to use, make your CPU, RAM, and everything on your computer sweat, generally that's poor performance. But you will get a slow response, regardless of how quickly the server gave you your information, regardless of how quickly IKEA put in a box all the pieces and send it to you. You have a hard time assembling that furniture. Your computer has a hard time dealing with your web application. That's very important. I do like to have browser simulations or automations for this purpose, to automatically measure how easy is for your computer. And the metrics are very different. There you just measure the client machine or the simulated instance or web browser, how much CPU is it sucking, how much RAM, the page render times, image download, JavaScript download. Some of those metrics for web performance, you measure them separately. And it doesn't have anything to do with load, how busy your server it is.
I just want to jump in there for a minute and say it's very important to also understand that there are a lot of different browser type metrics that you can look at for the performance. You talked about page load, right? But oftentimes, if you take a look at the page load time, if you do the inspect page on your favorite browser and you take a look at some of these timings, you might see a page load in like 3 seconds, but the page load time on the timer might be 10 or 12 seconds, right? So, and that's usually because there are other things that are going on behind the scenes that you don't see, the page is usable, the visible part of the page has been rendered, maybe things below the fold of the page are still being populated that you don't see. So it's important when you're looking at what you're going to measure in terms of the timings, not maybe the CPU utilization, but like the timings. From a business point of view, you need to look at what is critical for the business, right? Page load is a good thing, but again, if your users are using the page after 3 seconds and page load is 12 seconds, page load time might not be the response time metric you want to look at from a web performance page. You might want to look at, DOM interactive or visually complete or some of those other type of metrics that are built in there. Anyway, that's just a little side note, but again, make sure what you're picking as your time response is what is relevant to your business, because that's going to be the important thing to monitor and to track over time.
I totally agree, because based on experience and multiple organizations that I have worked with, they say the web developer, the people creating the application say, hey, it's showing after 2 seconds, as you said. And yeah, but you have like 20 widgets there, and 2 of them, the most important ones, take 12, 20, 50 seconds, 30 seconds, because it's a timeout right away. And you cannot use them at the moment that you want. And your browsers will tell you load time per element. Many of those are asynchronous. So the challenge of understanding them, and this translates again into the protocol side, where it is a little, the protocol simulations or automations tend to be linear. You most of the time cannot call 5 times at the same time and wait for the first one to respond, and a browser will tell you those metrics. So you need also that understanding to say, where am I going to automate which pieces on protocol level and which ones at a browser simulation level, which is a very good segue to the last part, where I wanted to say which would be the best mix that I like to do in terms of browser. Because again, as you well mentioned earlier, never ever would be my first choice to say 100% browser simulated.
Right.
To me, I'm a performance engineer, and that's a waste of resources, which doesn't translate into being performing. And I'm shaking and waving my hands here while I say that.
No. Yeah.
Please don't do it. Don't see how I'm shaking my hands. But it's the main part. Back to the IKEA example. Let's say that when you are putting together your furniture, you're going to receive the set of screws in a separate package. And there is when it might become interesting to know what happens under load. If the IKEA factory is having too many orders, and they just send you first, you're putting together a table, to call it in a way, and you have the plain part and the legs, and then you receive in a separate package the bolts, because it's a separate part of the factory. You're just plainly another factory. These will make a difference of how quickly can you put together the table.
Right.
But as long as you know that the table is easy put together on its own by itself, but you don't need to generate the load by ordering a bunch of tables, literally, or gathering them from your phone. You can just, there's a billion order tables sent through regular snail mail. And at the same time, order a real one to know how fast you will get the pieces. In this example, the pieces are separated, to know if you will get them at a good time. That's the only time when I think it's valuable to combine them, to mix the term web performance or web browser with a load test. You can simulate all your load, all your scenario through the protocol. And here fire up one automation at a browser level browser simulation. And then you will get the metrics, how it behaves under load, which the degradation, you are already seeing it at a protocol level. So the differences won't be that many. Generally, when the table is poorly designed, you get the packages from the same factory. And that's why I was giving a little bit this example of the bolts and nails for the table and the legs all coming in separate packages from the same factory. a good, you will notice right away when some pieces are not coming faster under load. But this generally talks about a poor design on the front end and the way that you are requesting things. I'm going to give another analogy for a CDN as an example. Instead of gathering the nails and bolts for your table from the same factory that is producing the legs and the body of the table, gather them from a nail factory, which is specialized on it, has them an incredible amount of nails and has inventory like crazy, and will get you the nails regardless of how many load is going on in the KA factory. So those are like the guidelines on the differences and why when we do a load test simulation for a very well designed web application through the protocol, we don't even call for those nails because we want to stress test that factory that we know has infinite amounts of nails. We want to stress IKEA, and we will focus on the legs of the table and do a bunch of orders for those.
Although there might be a time when you want to make sure your CDN can deliver, but that's we've talked about that in some other ones. Oh, in the previous shows we were talking about testing caching and CDN, and yeah, you do want to make sure that your CDN can handle that they do deliver, that they do have the nails, because like, we signed a contract and well, they don't have it anyway. But that's a separate topic, which we've discussed. So building on this a little bit, right? So from my understanding and the viewpoint I was going to look at, because I still want to get to the point of when do we add it in, but I think this might lead to it a little bit, right? So I would think, again, not having been able to ever do this in the real world, that my plan, me and my lead's plan, we were going to do the web performance test on its own, not under load, to get all the timings and metrics. And our other plan was going to be to run this from several different geolocations, right? Because if you think about wherever your data center is, whether it's cloud, whether it's on-prem, you have different performance in different geolocations. So you should try to represent, if you're only US based, do East Coast, West Coast, and somewhere in the middle, North, South, whatever. So maybe you do 4 points. If you're more globally based, you might have a test, from a single browser in different geographic locations to see, depending on the geographic distribution, what the performance is of your browser. Now that is under, let's say, sunny day testing, because there's no load on the backend system.
Single user.
Maybe you run it twice, once getting everything first time, second time you reload it, so you're getting stuff from the browser cache. There's a whole bunch of different iterations you can take on that, right? So then I would think the reason you'd want to do it under load, right, so that once the backend is stressed, number one, you have all the connections that are going on, right? It's not only from your single browser, but from all the other HTTP scripts going on. That's stressing the connections, the memory, and everything else of the system. But also, if that does slow down the backend, if it slows down the network anywhere in the pipe, what does that slowdown do to the browser's ability? If, in your IKEA example, if I get the legs and the nails are supposed to come,
from
10 minutes later from another factory, 10 minutes later, if this was IKEA real time, I'd be able to, open up my box of legs, get everything laid out, get my tools. And by the time I did that, I'd have my nails and my bolts and I'd be able to start putting it together. But now if everything is slowed down, I now have to sit there and wait for those to come, right? So that makes the overall project time take longer. A lot of times you might have things in a browser where there might be synchronous waits for JavaScript. The JavaScript's going to say, I'm going to get a JavaScript and I'm not going to do anything else until I finish running this piece of JavaScript or processing this JavaScript. And then at the end of that, I have to download some images based on something in there. And so all these things can get slowed down, which by some, small latencies under load on the back end. So that would be, I think, to me, a good starting point to be able to compare what's the performance optimally and what's the performance under load and how much does that change, right? Because that would be, say, how much concern do we have to have during our peak hours for that experience to go down? But then I guess the big question is, under what circumstances do you do that testing? You were even saying something with the microservices and all that, and we know a lot of times load testing is not the full end-to-end load testing anymore. We still do that sometimes when it's necessary, but once you start going into the microservices world, a lot more of your load testing has to be these smaller tests just against the microservices when there's a change, when there's a release. And, there's the concept of if we're testing all the microservices together, or not together, but as changes are going, we don't have to do that stop the world end-to-end load test that gums up the works all the time. We can do that less frequently. So when in the world of modern load testing and not always doing the end-to-end testing, but when do we say, okay, now it's time to add that browser-based test? Should that always be like something everyone should strive to always have included in any browser-based test running? Because I would also, and I know I'm saying a lot of stuff here, so hopefully you're following, taking another step back to your load test approach, right? Oftentimes when running a load test, you don't necessarily include downloading your JavaScript files, your CSS files, and your images. You just test the main payload, right? So that if you're going to be incorporating browser testing, I would imagine you'd want all those in your test, all your images and CSS, because again, that's going to stress the whole system. It's going to put the proper stress on the web server, all the connections and all this kind of stuff. So how and when do you fit this in? And what's your approach for that? Because I think it's just like with any other load test, there are so many variables and, well, yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling here. What's your guidance? When do you put it in?
So you very well touched on some points where I think browser simulation is valid, but I wouldn't never for load again. I would even risk to have some of those through functional testing toolsets, UFT. What was the name? Selenium, where you can get some of those metrics. And as you mentioned very well, on one hand, when you have continuous integration and continuous releases, you need to make sure that your web performance doesn't get any degradation. And you need to be able to continuously be executing again and again some of those every time that you get a new release. So that is when I consider them to be very valid. Again, as well, when you mention different worldwide locations, I think web performance is one topic. And if you have a load test, regardless of where in the world are you, the assembly time, render time, and all of those metrics will be very similar, unless, as you will mention, you are testing CDNs and some of these distributed, even if your application is worldwide distributed in different servers, geolocated and things like that, you might want to just have a little bit in like synthetic monitoring, when you just generate little pings and load and tiny bits of activity spread over the world. I have 10 servers, one in Europe, one in Asia, one in America, one in Mexico City, why not? And you get baselines and deviations. And even when you are triggering those load tests through services, you are stressing each one of the elements on your solution. And even those API calls and everything, you can distribute them amongst the world. And at the same time, be running constantly these browser simulations or automations to gather those metrics. But again, I would never use them for the sake of load. They are very useful for many, many other things. And many of those metrics, you are already doing Selenium automations for functional testing every time that you have a release. And I will approach get this a little bit under the automation pyramid, where you tend to automate everything at the base, at the unit level, not so much, or a medium amount of automation at the middle with services, APIs, and integrations, and very, very little with end-to-end tests. You just simulate there what you were not being able to simulate on the other levels, or what was just too complicated. So that's where I would do some of those web front-end automations to gather performance. But again, never, ever again for load. I would run them together with load here and there. But the important metrics, you can get them with, and probably you are automating 10 business processes in a load test. But for a web browser, just to gather these metrics under load or baselining, I would have 1, 2 business processes maybe to make my life
Yeah.
easier. And for every time that a developer, a front end designer releases something new, I can just update 1 or 2 and always gather metrics and readings for the web performance. But I won't get tired of saying it. Never ever for load.
Yeah. So this is, as Jay says in his question, this isn't being incorporated. You're never going to run them, even if you have, let's say you ran them from a browser from 5 different geolocations and your test runs for 1 hour. Maybe you run each geolocation 2 to 5 times in that hour. So you have a good sample set of data. You're not doing load. It's just about collecting metrics from what is the experience from the browser while the entire system is under load. We're not generating load with it. It's just getting that full user experience side of the house, timings and consumptions and resource usage on the operating system.
Yeah, and if you need to gather some of those metrics as response under load, geo distribute your load as protocol API calls, and then run these tiny guys to gather some of those metrics during the load tests. And there you go. I mean, you don't have to fully. Well, sometimes there's no other choice, but most of the time you don't have to only rely on web browser for load. You can get a plethora of information and very good measurements with tiny guys, single guys here and there, just gathering these metrics, running occasionally, distributed. But yeah.
And I would expand too. You mentioned something about the functional testing earlier. And I would say, as a performance engineer, you should be going to, oftentimes the functional automation tests are being run by the functional QA department. Well, if they're running them in a somewhat streamlined way where they're not being really obtuse about how they're running it, you can be gathering your sunny day metrics from those tests.
Yeah, and
right?
many
If
of
they're
those
running a functional browser, and if they're doing that to make sure the function works, hop onto that and just grab the metrics that you want so that you can find any performance issues from under no load even, right? Just start it that early, shift left, or, if you will, to their realm and piggyback on their data. Because they're probably not looking at the timing so much.
To add to that, if you have a good APM that injects on the front end some of metering mechanisms so that whenever anyone in your team is doing some of those actions and you gather these metrics, browser response time rather than server response time, you're already covering those metrics. And again, against browser simulation, you have real people clicking it. You are gathering those metrics from the developer functional, blue-green testing, any other processes. You can gather some of those metrics. And that's why I said I like the web browser automations as a synthetic monitoring device rather than just in general. Because in general, you get metrics from everybody nowadays with a good APM in place.
I wonder if there are any good APM tools out there.
Yeah, those guys are terrible.
Yeah, no, I was kidding. And you actually bring up another interesting point too, because when you talk about the synthetics, right, a lot of times, at least for me, I often think of synthetics as a production use case, right? Like a synthetic tool. If you think so. Again, when you're looking at data and information, if you are running synthetics in production, well, there's your production data. Right? That's where you can see, most of the time you're doing your performance engineering and testing in pre-production to see how it's performing before it goes out. But once it's out, you should still be looking at how is production performing so that you can compare those production numbers to your pre-production numbers. And one of the benefits of the synthetic test versus a real user, because I think, with so many tools having real user monitoring based into it so that you can see what all the users are doing, what they don't account for is synthetics give you sort of that clean room test.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be from the same location, basically the same node, the same conditions every time. So it's a lot more scientifically clean. It's not 100% accurate. It's not 100% scientifically clean as if you were doing, some sort of heavy, NASA type of test, right? But this is going to give you a consistent test from a consistent location, from a consistent operating system. The browser's clean. There's no ad block plus on it. There's no ghostry. There's no weird plugin that's going to be injecting a bunch of porn ads into your end users and skewing your results, right? Because sometimes you look at end users and you're like, why is this page so slow for this user? Well, you have no idea what their desktop's doing. Maybe they're mixing down a podcast as they're loading up your page, right? So the benefit for a synthetic, however you're going to run it, if it's a Selenium test or if it's some sort of APM-ish type of synthetic, is that you're having a control that you can replicate the conditions in their known conditions. And I think that's one of the most important part of these. Yes, you have all the user data. Yes, you can see the developers if you have the proper type of monitoring in there and all the functional real users in your system. But having a control is very, very important because that's what should be consistent over time.
Yeah, and with those devices, you absolutely can detect right away. As you say, it's an almost perfect, flawless baseline that you're getting all the time. Whenever there's a deviation on any of the important metrics, it will light up like a Christmas tree on your APM or whatever you're doing. And these type of devices can be these web browser automations can be placed not only in production, but you can place them in your pipeline for dev, test, pre-prod, whatever. Whenever you commit a check-in from code, these things can be ramped up and start working on your test environments to right there and then tell you if there are any early deviations or any problems. So there are so many practical uses that you can give to browsers automations that everywhere but load tests.
Yeah. So yeah, I would think then, in terms of when to incorporate them into your load test, I would first say start without incorporating them into your load test, meaning start by gathering the data that exists, right? You have real users and you have functional test scripts being run. Start gathering your performance metrics that you want to measure from those, right? Because that's going to be your
baseline.
That's going to be your no load baseline.
Yeah,
that's going to be your best
Single
case
user
scenarios of performance. Yeah, and that's going to then get more people in the organization thinking about web performance, right? And once you have a good repository and know what's important, know what you want to collect from the existing data that you have, then it would be a matter of, when you're going to incorporate, run a few browser tests while you're running load to get some data points. It's going to be, number one, you'd have to run the right kind of load test, right? So it's going to be more of an end-to-end or no, it doesn't have to be end-to-end, but it's going to be more of a full
front end.
Yeah, I guess end-to-end. Yeah, full front-end test where it's going to probably make most sense to have those tests running and downloading, your HTTP test, that is your load tests, downloading all the elements on the pages, not just the main payload, but the images, CSS, because if you're going to see the impact on the browser, you want the rest of the system to be under full load of all those pieces. And then, how frequently you run it, I would imagine depends on, number one, how frequently are you planning on running a load test where you're stressing the actual web server by downloading the CSS and all, but also looking at what's changing. Is there any major redesigns going on the front end? Are there any new features being added to a page that might impact the performance of the page? It's about knowing what changes are going to be felt or visible on the front end. And then if you're going to be load testing that from the front, then be a good time to add the load test under that to pick up the change. But I don't think if there's no real, and this is where I look to you for advice too, if there's no real front end change going on, maybe all the functionalities in the back end, I don't know if it's important to run the browser data points every time, because again, you are going to have all those data points from the users, from the functional tests, which should clue you off if there's any change going on anyway. Again, unless it's super easy and simple and not getting in the way of your pipeline. What's your thought on that?
Well,
if that made sense.
if that in that scenario where there's absolutely no change in the front end and you're just trying to make sure that the changes on the back end are not impacting it, I would still have them if you already create them and let them run once a day, every hour, or every check-in. Um, just for, again, OCD person here, always making sure if your web front end is well designed, probably has CDNs, other dependencies that are separated, you always want to also keep a check on them to know that they are responding at a good rates, that none of them are down, and that gives you as well an identification. Supposedly that's what they are trying to stop, but your CDN goes down. And
Mm-hmm.
with them running occasionally, you will notice it right there and then. And it's, I think, added features to always assure that your application is performing all the time are not a waste of time or waste of efforts. I would still keep them even if there's no change. Again, we are not running them super long, super complicated set of multiple business processes. I would have 1, 2 business processes running that would take, worst case scenario, 5 minutes on top, and
Yeah.
running them once an hour doesn't hurt.
Okay, so let's talk briefly about the different tools that are available. The last one we were talking about was synthetics, right? So there's a lot of different synthetic vendors out there, and you might not necessarily always think of synthetics as a way to do this, but I think if you take a look, I'm looking at the frame of reference from the Dynatrace synthetics because obviously that's where I work, and I know quite a lot about that. But again, you can run a synthetic test, or you can have it set up from either private locations, and I'm not saying this is an advertisement, but in general for any synthetic tool, private locations or public locations, and you can just have them not running, and then when you're going to run a test, maybe you run them every 15 or 20 minutes or every hour during the test, you turn them on and they fire off, right? And you have the data collected in the same tool as your APM tool where you're going to be looking at a lot of your other back-end performance stuff. So that's one sort of nice solution that may fit depending on what your business functionality is that you're testing. You mentioned Selenium. I have no idea personally how operational Selenium still is and how hard it is to maintain. And if usually when people write automation tests in Selenium, are they valid for collecting this kind of performance data? So at this point, I turn it to you to ask, what are some tools and options, pros, cons that might be?
Some of those readings will depend on the browser being hijacked to run the simulation. They have APIs where you can extract, I think, most of those metrics. I have never had to go through all of them, but the basics to get the list of items downloaded, the render time, processing some of the basic performance measurements. You can automate processes to extract that information from them, or even including them, you can do Selenium, even go and click on some of those, the developer options, and save the, what was the name of there are some files that store these results from the network protocol and the performance.
File?
Say again?
Is it the HAR file?
Yeah. So some of these include all that information, and you can automate the generation and export on that. I don't know right off my mind which ones would do that. I tend, if it's not available, if it's not quickly there and then built into a tool, I request for them to be created. I create them myself to extract those informations. But even I had worked with some of the Tricentis guys, Tosca, where I managed to extract some of those metrics to be used for my performance metrics when they were doing their functional tests. And most of the tools, UFT, I remember I extracted some of those parameters as well. So I think those are the ones that I can think of most relevant in terms of functional, dedicated functional testing. I know there are some others that simulate browsers that are thought for load. Right off my mind, Tricentis has another one. It used to be Tosca Flood or Tosca Load. I can't remember. They'll get mad at me for not remembering the name. There's also Smartbird. They have Low Ninja, and
Yeah.
the top of my mind, those are the ones that I can remember. Those were designed more or less to load test, but they can be used to do low load simulations and will give you very good metrics. The deal there is to be able to extract them together with your APM or through
Yeah.
some mechanisms inside of those automations to extract it from the browser and send it to your APM as data points. I mean, with all the APIs internal to each piece and solutions, APM, um, browser automations, each one of them have so many connectors that you can enable and send information between them that
Yeah.
it's just a matter of creativity, I would say.
Yeah, and when you kept on saying browser over and over again, and it got me thinking we totally ignored mobile. So just briefly before we go, I want to say, yeah, mobile is an important part, but the more important part that mobile calls to mind is your connection speed. So consider when, again, not talking about load testing, talking about performance testing, when you're looking at the performance of a browser or a mobile app, you have to consider, are you talking about a desktop browser? Are you talking about a browser on a mobile device? Is that mobile device on Wi-Fi? Is that mobile device on a 4G, 5G, 3G connection? So if you are going to go down to into the weeds of web performance, not designed for web performance, right? That's the front end team, but measuring and testing it, make sure you're testing how your customers and users are actually accessing your properties, right? If it's mostly mobile, well, then you have to be simulating those reduced bandwidths. And even in the browser, like if you take a look at the Chrome browser tools, right, you can set it up to try to emulate the sizing of mobile or tablet or browser. They have a bunch of different device models in there, and you can even, I believe, I'm not sure if it's in Firefox or Chrome or which one it's in. They have some settings where you can set some bandwidth parameters. So it's something definitely to consider. Just like any load testing, right? The more you think about it, the more there is that you have to worry about and control and plan for. So don't forget about that. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
definitely. Mobile is a whole other beast and has multiple implications. Again, mobile web performance. It's something that usually I tackle through emulators,
yeah,
just tools as Perfecto. I remember we were gathering some of those response metrics when it is being drawn almost by visual recognition or pattern recognition. But again, you don't need to be doing a bunch of load to mobile. Just gather those metrics, make sure that you are measuring them
yeah,
isolated, and you'll be good to stress the other sides through just protocol calls.
yeah. And hopefully your organization has mobile optimize. If you're doing, mobile web, they have a mobile optimized site.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had a customer asking me why their page was so slow on mobile, and they said, "And don't tell me because it's too big." And I looked at it, and it was gigantic. I'm like, "It's because it's too big. You're downloading a 5 megabyte image. What can I
Wow.
tell you? I mean, so yeah." Those things become very apparent when you start doing those mobile emulations. They kind of fun. Leandro, was there anything that you wanted to make sure you got in that we might have missed? I know we kind of jumped around a bit.
Yeah, just I thought of another one that might be a valid-ish test for a load test doing this web browser, and it goes in line to what you were mentioning regarding the globalization and different locations and stressing the CDN or other containers. It would
Oh,
be a probably good idea, but again, I would encourage everyone to do that through a protocol. Just do a protocol request for the CSS, for the JavaScripts, for the images, and separately have one, unless you have no other way. But load test smarter rather than just trying to avoid correlations
yeah.
mindlessly.
And speaking of that, adding to that, I would also say anytime you're going to have a major load event that you need to test for, such as, let's say, World Cup or Super Bowl or something where you know you're going to have a ton of traffic and you need to test for that, that's also another really important time to make sure you're running some of those browser tests during your traditional load to see how that page is loading. Because we've seen it over and over and over again where there's those big events and pages just crumble.
Mm-hmm.
They just completely fall apart because everything starts breaking down or latency starts creeping in from all, little bits of latency from a million different directions will just destroy your page's ability to render and be functional. So yeah, if you're doing a specific marketing or high traffic test, that's another good time to throw in some sampled browsers to see how they perform in that time frame as opposed to just normal. All right. Any other last words before we go into the closing here?
Well, I'm going to repeat it. Load test to browsers, please. Be smarter. They are very useful, browser automations, but load test, I very much think if that's the only approach that you will do, probably it's a waste of resources.
Yeah, perfect. Today's Ask Perf Bytes episode is sponsored by Neotis. Neotis develops NeoLoad, the fastest and most automated load testing tool on the market. Design and maintain load tests 10 times faster than with any other tool, so your performance testing smoothly fits in Agile and DevOps. Learn more at www.neotis.com. That's NEOTYS.com. But once again, thank you everyone for listening today. And Jay, thank you for sending the question. We hope you learned a little bit from our response, and I did. Thank you, Leandro, for helping with today's question. Make sure everybody to check out Perf Bytes Español. Even if you don't speak Spanish, just go ahead and hit play on his podcast anyway. Give him some more accounts.
I tend to say too many R's. Radio performance.
Maybe if you listen to it enough, you might pick up some more too. So if you have any questions for Ask Perf Bytes, please send your questions to ask@perfbytes or follow me at askperfbytes on Twitter or Emperor Wilson. Or you can leave us a voicemail at 77-LOAD-PERF. That's 775-623-7373. Leandro, I think you're also taking questions for preguntas, right?
Oh, yeah. If you have any questions in Spanish that you would like as well to be asked, send it at preguntas@perfbytes.com.
Excellent. You can always subscribe to Ask Perf Bytes on Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Stitcher, Overcast, TuneIn, etc., whatever your favorite podcast aggregator is. If you like performance podcasts, make sure to also check out Pure Performance, which I co-host with Andy Grabner. Cheers, and as always, best of luck in your performance efforts. I'm Brian Wilson, and on behalf of myself and Mr. Leandro Melendez, thank you for listening.
Muchas gracias. Adiós, amigos.